Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/16 scale radio-controlled Korean War M26 Pershing. The model that you see here is built for commission and belongs to a private collector. As I often mention in these videos, I often take on commission build projects from models ranging from 1/35 scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. Now, for many of my fans who constantly view the channel and who are subscribers, they might be watching this video and getting a sense of deja vu. That's nothing to worry about, as this is not the first time I've built an M26 Pershing to the same specs that you see here. About 6 months ago, I completed another Pershing for commission that was radio controlled and was basically the same type of tank that is in this video. Information on that model can be found in the video listing, as well as can be found on the ECA channel. The model that you see here is basically built to the same exact specs detail-wise, and also utilizes many of the same off-the-shelf and aftermarket components that were mentioned in the last video. The reason why this model was built was because this model here is actually going to the same customer that purchased Margaret a few months ago. When that model was commissioned, he wanted to specifically make the tank a real M26 Pershing from Korea that had the name of Margaret. Problem was that Margaret had some field modifications in which the crew went ahead and amputated the two front fenders. This was built into the model that was finished. However, when the commissioner saw that, he wanted to have a vehicle with the front fenders present. So in order to build that vehicle, I had to go ahead and build a whole nother M26 Pershing. Now, normally this would definitely lead to some problems. However, while I was building Margaret, I liked the tank so much that I went ahead and purchased another base kit, as well as all the same exact detail and aftermarket parts that went into that build in order to build a Margaret for myself. Once Margaret was finished and the commissioner wanted the tank with the fenders, I went ahead and simply had all the components on hand to simply build the tank that you see here, and Margaret will end up in my own personal collection. Now, because the real M26 Pershing that was named Margaret had the fenders removed, making this one with the Margaret markings would have been inaccurate. So rather than going that route, I went ahead and made this vehicle another tank from the same unit. That unit in Korea was known to have all of their tanks with the names of women, and the decal sheets and the marking sheets that contained Margaret also had the name of Alice. This vehicle here is better replicating that of the M26 Alice. I'll be going over more about those markings in the end portion of this video when I go over the paint and the markings. Now, because detail and functionality wise, this model is almost identical to that of Margaret, I'm not going to really spend a whole lot of time in the description as I typically do on these videos, so this video should pass by with a little bit faster pace. Again, if you want to find out more information about more of the information that was mentioned in the other videos, I strongly recommend watching the series on Margaret before watching this video here. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around the model. This vehicle here is the ubiquitous M26 Pershing. Now, as we all know, the M26 program dates back to World War II, and it was developed throughout the majority of the war, and then by the time it was actually fielded, the war was in its closing days and months. After the war, the M26 went through a little bit of an upgrading program in order to iron out some of the initial flaws that were found in the design when the T26E3s were first fielded. Keep in mind, when the tanks were first fielded, they weren't really adopted yet and were really more or less rough prototypes. Some of these flaws that were corrected were the reinforcements that were added to the final drive to prevent them from cracking, as well as also adding turnbuckles to that of the tin work fenders, again to prevent them from getting damaged when the tank was in operation. Some other changes to the M26 design also include that of changing out the travel lock to one that is not integrally cast to the exhaust, and also replacing and deleting of the extra hull periscopes, which were found adjacent to the two bow hatches. By 1950, the diplomatic situation on the Korea Peninsula deteriorated, and on 25th of June 1950, the North invaded the South. The North Korean communists were fully equipped with weapons and gear from the Soviet Union as well as China. For vehicles, the mainstay of the North Korean forces was that of the T-34-85, as well as the Su-76. This sudden invasion caught the UN forces off guard, and the North Koreans were very effective at pushing the forces all the way back down to the bottom of the peninsula. At the time, the U.S. forces were equipped with primarily M24 Chaffee light tanks. These vehicles proved to be ineffective at dealing and thwarting the T-34-85s. Because of this problem, there was an immediate rush in order to scrounge as many medium and heavy tanks that were located throughout bases in the Pacific, as well as bases on the west coast of the United States. The vehicles that were scrounged up were primarily M4A3E8 Shermans, as well as M26, M26A1, and several M46 Pattons. It's credited that because of these reinforcements with these type of tanks, they were able to halt the advance of the North Koreans and then start pushing them back up to the 38th parallel. In Korea, the combat experience of the M26 was actually very positive. The vehicles were far outclassing that of the T-34-85s in just about every conceivable way. Even though the M26's experience in Korea was very positive, it was quite evident that the vehicle's design was beginning to show its age, and it was not going to be able to contend with the newer Soviet tank designs, which were coming off the production lines as well as were on the drawing boards. This was more so true for the M26, but this was also applicable for the M46 as well, which is why both of these vehicles, shortly after the time of Korea, were quickly phased out to secondary line service, and the U.S. push for that of the M47 and the M48. Now, before I go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the project was first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter model looked like. And here's the model at the start of the project. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this 1/16 scale, ready-to-run, radio-controlled M26 T26E3 Pershing from Heng. Now, I'm not going to go too in-depth with the review for this model, as I've recently completed another 1/16 scale RC M26 Pershing, which utilized the exact same starter model. That build can be found on the ECA channel in the video listings. In there, I go into more in-depth on what the background is on the Heng Pershing, as well as really where it comes from and what was changed to it from its stock original form. I will say, though, that this version is the most current version that is being offered by Heng. Here we have the box. The models are shipped in this type of a box that we have here, with this type of graphic and this type of overall graphic design. Ironically, the box is much better than the actual quality of the starter model itself, but again, for the type of build I'm going to be doing, that's totally irrelevant. This vehicle is also different compared to the last Heng M26 Pershing build with that of the stock electronics. The radio that this version has is this 2.4 gigahertz radio that is their current generation. The Heng radios have been upgraded to the following unit, and this generation here is a vast improvement over the last generations in that they've corrected a lot of little quirks that were found on the last generation of remotes. Now, I'll be going over more in depth on what these features and changes are, as well as what the controls are in a upcoming scene of this video with this project. With this model fully completed, I'll take it for a test run where I'll go over all of these said functions in more depth and detail. The model that you see here are very plentiful on the market and can be found just about anywhere online. Anywhere from eBay, as well as many online retailers. This particular model here I acquired off of Amazon.com. The model came in a very quick manner and basically stayed in this format until I was ready to start on the project. These models here are very affordable and can be had anywhere from about 80 to about 150 US dollars. Now, one thing to point out that this version here is the all plastic version of the Heng model. Heng has another version that's found on the market, which is known as the metal upgraded one. This version here is a little bit more tempting to many people, and it costs just a little bit more compared to the plastic variant. With the metal upgraded one, many of the track, the row wheels, and the gearbox are replaced with that of metal components. However, in my experience, the metal version is a little bit of a dubious value in that the metal components are not necessarily any better compared to the plastic offerings. Namely with that of the gearbox. The metal gearbox that comes with the metal upgraded versions are made from a zinc cast metal alloy. It is, from my experience, repeated experience actually, that these gearboxes are very poorly engineered and wear out and break with not a whole lot of use. Definitely not ideal for the situation. The track that comes on the metal versions may seem like a good bargain. However, the metal track quality is not exactly the best. The metal track that comes with the metal upgraded ones is the exact same pattern of track that's found on the plastic versions. In that on the inside portion, you have these little wells that on the real track would actually house that of the rubber pads. Now, because of this, in my opinion, the Heng metal track is definitely not recommended. Rather than using the Heng metal track, I'll be replacing those with the metal ones from Matto. The Matto metal tracks are far superior, in my opinion, compared to the Heng variants in many different ways, which I'll go over once I get to the actual finished model portion of this video. Now, as for the kit, like I said before, it's just a no-frills Heng M26 T26E3 Pershing. Of course, like I've said in the last model that I did, these kits here are basically nothing more than a watered-down version of the Tamiya full-option M26 Pershing kit. The Heng took the Tamiya tooling, made some simplifications and some improvements to the model, making it for an easily produced RC, ready-to-run RC model for a lower price point compared to the Tamiya offering. The pros about this is that this puts the vehicle in a nice price point where a lot more people can get access to a 1/16 scale tank. Unfortunately, some of the downsides is that by Heng doing some of the modifications, they made some inaccuracies as well as some other areas on these models here that need to be addressed by the builder when it comes building it as a scale model. Of course, I'll be going over these quirks and improvements as the video progresses, as well as also in the last M26 Pershing video that I've made. Now, also supplied with the model, of course, is several runners of detail components that are used to get the model to its basic build configuration from the kit offering. Many of these components will be used, some won't, and again, this will be discussed as the video progresses. Now, as you see on the table, one of the wheel halves did pop off. This is not very uncommon, as the pieces sometimes are either not glued or just pressure fit on. Of course, as the build progresses, this is definitely going to be addressed. But here you get to see the quality of the plastic which is used for the row wheels, which is not too shabby, and this wheel will be used on this build, albeit in a painted format. Of course, more information on this is to come. Starting with the model's running gear, all of the road wheel components that you see here are purely stock. The only mods that I made was that during the construction phase of the build, I went ahead and removed the road wheels in order so I could get better access to painting them in a thorough manner. While removed, just before the reassembly of the road wheels, I went ahead and added a smear of grease to each one of the axles, and then the road wheel was simply then remounted on. Another mod that I like to do is that on the fasteners that hold the road wheel in place, I like to add a small little drop of Loctite, which keeps everything from working itself loose, and the extra grease, in my opinion, makes for a more efficient running model. Moving on from the road wheels takes us to the model suspension. Now, the suspension is something to bring up on these Heng and Hagen M26 series of models. The reason has to do with the way the suspension works. Now, the suspension is fully functional and works perfectly fine. The issue in place comes in the accuracy department. If we notice, on top of each and every one of these road wheels, there is a small little shock absorber found. The shock absorbers are found on the real vehicle, but are only found on the first two and last two wheels of the tank. The wheels in the center do not have the external shock absorbers present. The reason why they are present on these models here has to do when Heng was copying and simplifying the Tamiya full option kit. In order to make the model much cheaper and more easily assembled and produced by the factory, they went ahead and redesigned the suspension so that every wheel utilizes an external shock absorber. This cuts down on the complexity of each part and also the amount of tooling and molds that need to be created by them. Because of this has the situation that we have here. Now, unfortunately, as per today's video, I'm not sure if there's any sort of a solution to solve this problem, and this is the type of thing that you're just going to have to live with your Heng or Tagan M26 Pershing. Now, for most people out there, myself included, I can, believe it or not, live with the extra shock absorbers found on these pieces here. However, if you are unable to stomach these inaccuracies, your only recourse is to pay a little bit more money and go for the Tamiya full option kit. Moving from the suspension takes us to the sprockets. Just like with the last Pershing, these pieces here are highly recommended and are a nice modification compared to the stock plastic offerings. One detail element that is missing on the Matto sets, however, is that of the center hub of the sprocket. The hub that you see here is a 3D printed set from shapeways.com. The link is found in the video description below. Now, the piece is nicely made. However, one modification I made to the Shapeways piece has to do with this center fastener. The center fastener found on the Shapeways piece has a hole present in the printing. On the real M26, this wasn't the case, so I went ahead and deleted the printed on fastener and I simply replaced it with that of a real M3 hex bolt. This improves the accuracy compared to the stock original piece. Of course, this is done to both of the sprockets, and is a simple mod that I definitely recommend for anyone who has this piece. Moving our way to the rear plate takes us to the final drives first. The final drives have their rigidity braces placed. Like I said in the other video, when the M26 was first fielded, this was a weak point with the design, and these braces were subsequently developed. By the time of Korea, most of the M26s had this modification added. As for the pieces, these are the ECA resin ones, and to mount them, I simply made a small little blister on both of these sides here, in which on the real one, the fastener would connect to. On the blister, this would be welded to the final drive, and the sculpted weld beads were also added. Moving down to the bottom, you can see here the ECA lower hull access cap. And then moving from there takes us to the weld beads. The M26, the entire rear section here, was actually comprised of a mosaic of casted components, which were then all fitted together in a jig and welded, much in the same way as was done on the front portions of the early M4 Shermans. Another mod that was made was that of the way the hull bolts together. On the Heng kit, there are two fasteners located in these two sections over here, which secure the rear to the model. These sections here were deleted, and in their place actually have a magnet locking system so that the top deck stays firmly connected to the hull. By doing this, this also helps the look of the model compared to leaving it stock with its fastener holes exposed. Moving from there takes us to the tow cable detailing. As you notice, there's no tow cable on this model. This was requested by the customer. Rather than having the tow cable, I do have, though, the mounts present for where the tow cable would have been connected to. These were simply fabricated out of pieces of steel that were then soldered to a wire brad and then mounted to the model. Here we have the tow cable retention clip that we have here. This is a resin component from ECA. From the tow cable takes us to the modified exhaust system. Like I mentioned in the other video, the M26 utilized several different patterns of travel locks. This one here is the version that would have came after the T26E3, and then of course before the M26A1. This is a resin set from eastcoastarmory.com, and you can see it's fully functional as it folds out of the way, as well as it's also fully functional. The tow hitch here is stock Heng and no mods were made. As is the communication box. Only mod that I made to that was the addition of the wire that we have here, which is just a small little piece of floor wire. But the addition of this is also greatly noticeable and helps the model compared to leaving it stock. Moving from the telephone box takes us to the rear taillights. The taillights you see here are the stock original ones, however have been modified by having their face detailing added. For the face detailing, these are again the 3D printed versions found on Shapeways. And like I mentioned before, the Shapeways versions are actually intended for that of the Henlong Walker Bulldog, which replicates that of the post-World War II pattern of taillight. To convert it to the World War II version, all you have to do is delete the little flange detailings that are found around the corners. Once done and added to the model here, greatly helps it compared to leaving it with the stock dome LEDs present. Moving from the taillight takes us to the Fender Supports. Just like I mentioned in another video, when the M26 was first fielded, there were problems with the tin work being easily damaged and bent up during operation. So these supports were constructed. The supports you see here are the earlier patterns, which consist of two small connecting joints and a solid rod. Later on, the design was improved by having that of an adjustable turnbuckle system. However, for the purposes of this tank here, the early pattern would have been more accurate. The pieces are all fabricated out of bits of metal that are all soldered together. It is a mirror image on the opposite side. However, it's important to point out that on the opposite side here, to work around the telephone box, the piece has to be shaped slightly differently. This is again as per the real vehicle. Moving from the turnbuckles takes us to the other tin work detailing, which, starting with that, is of the small little Footman loops. These are small tie downs for mounting on equipment, and these would have been found on all of the M26 series of vehicles. On the back here, they are in this style format, and on the sides you'll notice that they are in the format that you see here. All these pieces were fabricated and scratch built out of small thin pieces of wire that were then drilled and mounted to the side of the tank. On the opposite side, they are also present. However, the pattern is much different, and they are right and left hand specific. This is important to note for anyone who's going to be modeling an M26 and want to go ahead with this procedure here. You don't want to make it as a mirror image. Moving from the handles takes us to the bins themselves. The bins were modified in that the stock Henlong, and this is also true for the Tegan units, the bin does not have its lid separator, and it's just one continuous box. Of course, on the real tank, these lids would have been able to open and close, and so the lid detailing was added. This was added with strips of plastruct that were added to the front and sides of each of the bins found on the vehicle, 6 total. Moving on from there, it takes us to the top lid handles. The lid handles are also an addition, as the original kit has these pieces molded in. These were simply deleted, and aftermarket ones were added in place. Moving our way to the front of the vehicle, first takes us to the actual cast texturing. You'll notice that the cast texturing has been added to the bottom, the entire front, and also spills into some of the top portion of the front of the vehicle. This is as per the real unit, as on the real M26. This was all comprised of a single steel casting. In addition to adding the casting, you'll see the modifications made to the ABER M1919. It has here the tarpaulin mount, which was a piece of wire that was added. The machine gun ball is that of the ECA unit, and the barrel itself is the metal version from ABER. The ABER sets are typically used on my builds and are strongly recommended. The ABER set was modified though in having a fiber optic mounted on the inside so that when the animation flashes, so does the muzzle end. This will be discussed more in the driving portion of the video. Moving from the ABER M1919 takes us to the ABER headlights. The headlights you see here were heavily modified from the stock units, as the original ones are very soft in detailing. First, the original light base itself was replaced, and in its place the ECA one was utilized. As for the brush guards are the stock units but have been tweaked and modified in order to have them be more accurate compared to their stock offering. This includes modifying the straps and how they actually connect to the machine gun blister on this side of the vehicle, and on the opposite side, the way the piece connects to the headlight tower. Also added, you'll notice the canisters found for the plunger, which on the real vehicle, of course, would be added to plug up the hole when the headlight is not present. Moving from the bow headlight takes us to the front fenders. The front fenders you see here are the stock units, however have been modified to have more detailing. What was added was that of the cut line that we have here, which gives the illusion that the fender is separate from the rest of the tin work, and you'll notice the 3 fasteners that are found here. On the real Pershing, this is how the piece would be fastened to this component. The fasteners were added, as well as also the mounting brace that we have here on the side. You'll notice a small little plate that is welded to the front of the tank. This is present on the real M26 Pershing and is a mirror image on the opposite side of the model. Moving up takes us to the Siren. Now the Siren that you see here is absent on the Heng models. They just give you an empty brush guard that goes on this portion here of the fender. The Siren detailing is the rest and set from ECA, and you can see the Siren present, as well as the power cable, which emerges from the Siren and enters into the hull. This is, again, as per the real vehicle. Moving from the Siren takes us to the side portion of the tank. If we notice, the side skirts were deleted from this model. Now, the side skirts are integrally molded to the upper hull molding of the Heng and also the Tagan M26 models. This was amputated with that of the Multimaster, and then everything was sanded nice and flush to the way you see it here. Now, in addition to cutting off the fenders, I also went ahead and added the small little holes, which would have been found on the side of the tin work, which on the real tank is how you would affix and mount on the side skirt paneling. Now, with the addition, or I should say with the removal of the side skirts, one modification I had to make had to have been done to the bottom portion of these bins. The way the thing is molded is that the bins are molded into the top deck, and because of which there is a hollow cavity under each of these bin locations. This, in my opinion, is noticeable when you remove the side skirts, and to delete this, I went ahead and plugged up the under portions with that of strips of plastic. The plastic sections were cut to shape, mounted in, and then everything was smoothed over then with the bodywork. This was also done to Margaret as well. Moving from the side skirts takes us to the front upper hull. You'll notice that the cast texturing is continuous, which is as per the real vehicle. Also, I went ahead and amputated out the 2 front molded in extra periscopes. These periscopes were only found on the first 10 or so T26E3 production models. After that, it was deemed that those extra periscopes were redundant and were no longer necessary. All vehicles that followed had these sections here plugged up with steel plugs in this format that you see on this model. These 2 detail inserts are sets found on eastcoastarmory.com. As for the hatches themselves, the bow periscopes that were molded in were also deleted. In their place, the 3D printed ones from shapeways.com were added. Now, just like with Margaret, the brush guards that are found on the 3D printed ones, although are very nice, can be deemed as being very frail and fragile. Rather than keeping the brush guards, I went ahead and replaced those with the metal ones from Shumo. Shumo ones drop directly onto the 3D printed part in a nice seamless way and are recommended. The problem with the Shumo sets, however, it's to point out, is that they are becoming scarcer compared to the amount of availability that they were a number of years ago. So if you can find them, hold on to them. You can also see here I added that of the fire extinguisher. Now, the fire extinguisher, again, is an ECA item, and it's important to point out that on the Heng model, this is a redundant feature as it's found on the opposite side of the tank as well. On the real M26, this is not the case, so if you are building a Heng or a Tagan M26 Pershing, delete this section here from the driver's side, as it was not present on the real tank. Moving from the bow hatch area takes us to the rear hull with that of the radiator cover. The radiator covers that you see here are the stock molded in unit, but have been modified. The modifications include that of added cast texturing, that of the missing fastener detailing found on the 2 top sections as well as on the side. And I also changed out the fuel cover. Rather than utilizing or trying to salvage the fuel cap found on the stock Heng kit, I simply amputated and replaced it with a rest one from ECA. Moving back further on the grill takes us to the transmission axis hatches. The only addition I made was that of the hatch stop, which is found on this section and this section here, and again are present on the real vehicle. These are just simply cobbled together from pieces of styrene. Moving our way to the tank's turret, the tank's turret was modified in that the two halves, which are found on the original model, were then permanently affixed together, and everything was smoothed over with that of the bodywork. This would include that of the deletion of the fastener locations, and you'll notice a nice cast texturing applied to the entire turret as a whole. In addition to the turret, you'll notice the typical mods, which is that of the hoist lugs, which have been drilled out, again to improve their accuracy. And the weld beads were also added to these two locations here. The cast texturing was also applied to the shell ejection port, as well as I also drilled out the hinge section of the shell ejection port, so it has the illusion that the piece is separate and is hinged. As for turret detailing, it's all standard M26 Pershing. On this side here, we have the ECA resin spare track rack. We have here the track jack, which is the stock unit but has been modified. On the opposite side, we have here the foul weather driving hood container. The unit was modified in that it had its center support section, which is missing on the Heng model, and you'll notice the small little Footman loops found on these sections here. Of course, weld beads were added as well. Here goes the secondary track jack, which again is the kit one, but modified. The way these are modified is that I add the center threaded rod detailing, and I also add the rear section here of the rack, which is missing on the stock units. I also drill out the section here where on the real jack you would stick in the lever in order to actuate the ratchet. On the rear section here of the turret, again, it's all standard M26. The two barrel section clamps that we have here are stock Heng and were simply added with the additional welds, along with the cooling section clamp for that of the M2. As for the rear bustle of the turret, this is all stock M26. Of course, all this equipment would be used to store the M2HB machine gun when not utilized. As for the details, the barrel clamps as well as the barrel extension clamp are all stock and were simply mounted as is, with the only addition made with that of some sculpted weld beads. As for the storage pintle, this here is the unit from EastCoastArmory.com and was mounted to the Heng turret. Moving our way up to the turret roof, all the detailing again is standard M26. The travel lock you see here is fully functional and is modified from the stock original unit. The way it was modified was the way it mounts to the piece. The kit originally wants you to clip it on. This piece here was modified in that I drilled it out and it's secured in place with a pin, thus holding it in more securely compared to the stock. As for the antenna bases, we have here the ECA MP48, as well as an MP65, again from ECA. The MP65 is the flexible resin unit found on the website. Now currently the antenna is not permanently glued in place. This has to do for that of transport, as the model does have to be boxed up and shipped to the customer, to which then he will simply glue this section on himself. Hatches in the commander's cupola, all stock. So is the vane sight. Only on the vane side I went ahead and drilled out the ranging sections that are found on this section here. The searchlight is the 3D printed one from shapeways.com, which again I've mentioned in several videos, and I will be recommending it again as it is absolutely perfect in detailing. The brush guard received the same modification as the ones on the bow hatches, with that of the 3D printed base and the Shumo metal cage itself. And like I said before, the hatches are left totally stock. As for the M2HB, this is mixed of parts from Shapeways as well as the aftermarket pieces from ABER. The machine gun's receiver is the Shapeways listed one, as well as the cradle mount that we have here. The ABER set was added to the Shapeways one due to the Shapeways barrel being warped, so the original barrel was removed, and the barrel, the vented barrel extension, as well as the handles and the trigger assembly were all from the ABER photo etch set, which is, even though it's designed for a Tamiya M2HB, it simply drops onto the Shapeways version without any issues. Moving our way to the tank's mantlet. The mantlet first features that of the ECA mantlet detail inserts. The stock Tegan and the Heng Long inserts are very soft in detailing, and the ECA ones are a drop-in replacement for those. Everything was then blended in with that of the bodywork, and you'll notice that of the tarpaulin mounts, which have been fabricated and added to the front. Also, you'll see here that the mantle itself was modified with both its cast texturing added, as well as its modification for that of the gunner sight and the 1919. The gunner sight on the original Heng Long unit has a large LED that is present, and on the real M26, there's actually a stepped down type detailing appearance that's found on this piece. This is facilitated with that of the ECA drop-in replacement. You remove the LED, add the ECA unit, and then add the LED to the insert. This gives you the firing LED light still present, but it doesn't have any external type accuracy issues that are found on the original kits. On the opposite side, you'll see the location for that of the 1919 coax machine gun. This is absent on the Heng Long unit as it's one continuous casting. Finally, the model's barrel was modified in that the stock Heng Long barrels are a lot shorter than they should be for an M26. This does feature the ECA barrel extension, where you simply remove the stock muzzle brake, add the extension, and then re-add the muzzle brake. After you do a little bit of putty work to the seams, you have the correct length of barrel for that of an M26. Now, the barrel extension is hollow, and the unit can still fire its airsoft BB without any issues. Moving on to the paint and the markings, the paint and the weathering work that you see on this model here are identical to the colors used on Margaret, with the same paints no less. As for the shade of olive drab, being a Korean War pattern of vehicle, the darker shade of olive drab would be more appropriate for a vehicle of this period. As for the markings, this is just like with Margaret, a mix of Archer dry transfers for that of the stars, along with Tamiya decals for the division and name markings that you see on this model. Before I go ahead and take Alice out on a test drive, I might as well take the opportunity to have Alice compared with Margaret one last time before the final test drive, and then of course before boxing her up and sending her off on her way. Here you can see the difference the appearance looks with the fenders on compared to having them cut off. Other than the tin work mod, the two tanks are basically identical. Now, this model here is radio controlled, of course, and under the hood, the model is basically stock. Stock electronics and mostly stock mechanical functions. What was changed, however, was that of the gearbox. The gearbox that this model originally had was that of the plastic version, in which the gears were broad nylon gears. The gearbox was replaced immediately with that of the high-performance gearbox from Heng Long. That gearbox utilizes all steel gears that are also nice and broad and have ball bearings on them for greater efficiency. Just like with the Margaret build, on the high-efficiency gearbox, I did not utilize the stock motors that came with these units. In their place, I swapped them out for the original motors that came with the plastic gearbox. The reason why I did this was simple. The blue motors are very powerful and do output at a very high speed. The problem is once it's installed into the model will travel at faster speeds than is really needed. And although it looks impressive and is very fun to drive, for scale speeds, this is not very helpful. Now, the model does also have a proportional drive electronics, but in my experience with working with these is that with the stock electronics, if you utilize the blue motors, the stock radio will have a hard time in controlling the blue motors at a very controllable pace, and the model will still perform, but it will perform at above average speeds. By swapping out the motors, you get a nice slower, more controllable rate of speed, and the model does have all of the benefits of having the all-steel gearbox with the ball bearings, as well as with the metal track and sprocket. Now, in case if anyone is watching this and saying to themselves, well, why did you go through all this effort to change out the stock components with metal ones when you could just buy the metal upgraded one that are found on Amazon or on eBay? The reason for that is also very simple. The metal upgraded versions are actually made with subpar components. The all-metal gearbox is actually made from zinc alloy gears, and these gears will wear out in a very fast and quick manner. You will not get a whole lot of mileage onto your model before you need to swap out the entire gearbox as they lock up. I recently did a video about this in more detail with a jumbo Sherman tank that was converted from a Heng M4A3, in which it was the metal upgraded version, and there you will see the gearbox lock up and break during operation. In addition to that, the metal track that come with the all-metal versions are also not nearly as superior as the ones found on the Matto tracks that are on this model here. The metal ones that come with those models, the link is made of one piece that includes the track pins and the tooth, as opposed to these versions here, which are more or less a lot like the Tamiya track links, which are more closely resemble that of the real tank. Now, outside of the gearbox replacement, the remainder of the equipment and electronics were purely stock Heng. This also includes that of the radio. For the radio, I utilized the 2.4 gigahertz transmitter, which was supplied with the model. Now, this version of the M26 utilizes Heng's current generation of radio systems, which are improved from the previous generations which came before. Let me go ahead and turn on the tank so you can see exactly what I'm referring to. First, the radio gets turned on. And we'll now turn on the tank. To activate the model, you hit the little padlock, which will start the engine. The engine noise already is a lot different compared to the sound cards found on the previous generations. Now, over here we have several animations to choose from. There's volume, there's smoke, now also important to point out, on this model here there's no need to have a separate tube for that of the smoke system refueling, as you can easily get access to the refueling spout from the rear portion of the exhaust manifold. The G is that of the machine gun, and here you can see the fiber optic system that I mentioned earlier. As for the other functions, this button over here also shoots the machine gun. This button over here fires the BB. The way the BB is fired is you depress on this button here, and you press up on this radio. If you notice, I marked it with a little red dot. I push this and go up, and you're going to fire the main airsoft gun. This stick here is all turret controls, left and right. Let's see. And up and down, elevate, and depress the gun. Now, this is one area which was improved by Heng compared to the older units, and also it's superior, in my opinion, to some of the versions from Taillights. In the old units, you would go down, and by going down, the gun would elevate and depress on a control track. On this unit here, that's not the case. This is to raise the barrel, you simply go up on the radio, and to lower the gun, you go down on the radio. Much more intuitive compared to the older units. Now, as for drive, that is all done with this stick over here. Now, if we notice, there is a adjustable trim, which is kind of useless on these Heng models. However, what I went ahead and did was I marked the section with a red line in order for the user to know if the switch has been bumped. A lot of times you'll be driving these models and unknowingly bump the switch from left to right, and you'll be driving the model will be performing very strangely. This is simply because of this toggle here. If this happens to your own Heng model, stop what you're doing, and first thing you check is the trim. Make sure the trim is in the center. 90% of the time, that's what's causing the track to drive in a funky manner. Now, the model does have proportional drive steering, where if you give it a little bit of throttle, it will give you a little bit of speed. The more throttle you give it, the faster the model will go. Half speed, full throttle. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for this 1/16 scale, radio-controlled Korean War era M26 Pershing. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, where there are more photographs of this particular build that have been posted, as well as the other builds that have been posted on the ECA channel in the past. In addition to that, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/16 and 1/6 scale builds and detail components. Thanks for watching.